sharks could use sonar to catch Deep Dive FM. Today's topic, is an all-krill diet really good for you? And even Argentine ants could get teamwork and productivity hacks from the Colony Network. All over the world, animals are definitely communicating. Their sounds carry stories, warnings, mating calls, and even gossip. And scientists are listening. They're studying these wild podcasts to uncover all sorts of secrets about life on Earth. And speaking of secrets, have you heard that Minute Earth is now a podcast? From quirky animal behaviors to the mysteries of ecosystems, we dive deep into the science of how the world works. It's a conversation you won't want to miss. Subscribe to the Minute Earth podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. The Titanic was once thought to be indestructible, and we all know how that turned out. And now it's dying a second death on the seafloor as it erodes. It's disappearing so quickly that experts predict that by 2050 there will be no sign of it. Meanwhile, this Greek merchant ship, which sank 2,400 years ago, is super well preserved. What the wreck is going on here? Find out in our full video below.
There are lots of reasons you might not want to be a vampire, but the worst part might be the diet. Almost as soon as you sit down to a meal, the problems with feeding on blood begin. Within minutes, your victim's blood will start clotting to prevent them from bleeding out, which will end your feast. If you do manage to keep the blood flowing, you face another potential problem. Your victim's immune system is constantly patrolling for unknown substances. So the longer you feed, dribbling saliva into your victim along the way, the more likely it is that these scouts will come across your saliva and flag it as foreign. The resulting immune response could make your dinner unappetizing, or make your victim uncomfortable enough to dislodge you. But an even more immediate problem is the ridiculous quantity of blood you'll have to consume. Because while blood does contain nutritious stuff, it's mostly water. So you'll need to ingest a lot of it, like many times your own weight. Ugh. Instead of thinking about vampires as monsters, maybe we should think of them as misunderstood critters trying to navigate a bloody difficult way of life.
The Aldabra rail is the only bird that we know of that has evolved twice. Long ago, a group of birds called Indian rails were out flying over the ocean and got lost and landed on Aldabra Atoll. Because there weren't any tall trees to nest in or large predators on the island to eat the birds, over several generations, the arrivals lost the ability to fly and instead evolved thick legs to walk around on the sand, becoming a totally new species in the process. But about 136,000 years ago, sea levels rose and temporarily flooded the island, drowning all the birds and making the new species extinct. But the Aldabra rails didn't stay extinct. A new group of Indian rails also got lost over the ocean and settled on Aldabra Atoll. And because Aldabra still didn't have any tall trees or large predators, the new birds too soon lost the ability to fly and evolved thick legs. And just like that, Aldabra Kadabra, an extinct species, reappeared.
What's the difference between an opossum and a possum? An opossum is a small, furry, arboreal marsupial that lives in the Americas. When it gets scared, it goes catatonic and releases liquid from its anal gland. A possum is a small, furry, arboreal marsupial that lives in and around Australia. When it gets scared, it screams and releases liquid from its anal gland. The next time you put on perfume, I want you to think about an extremely constipated whale. Because until recently, the secret ingredient in all the most expensive perfumes was a substance known as ambergris, which is literally whale poop that got so big and impacted that it exploded the whale's colon, killing the leviathan and releasing a butt pearl so splendiferously odorous and valuable that when it washes up on the shore, it can sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars to folks in the perfume industry. If you want to know more details about this poop to perfume journey, check out the video below.
Caribbean hermit crabs are always growing, and thus they're always on the lookout for empty new shells to move into. Sometimes the empty shell is the perfect fit. In this case, the crab can simply take the new one and leave its old one behind for someone else. Often though, the spare doesn't fit. It might be a great shell, but perhaps it's just a little too big. Instead of moving on though, the crab waits nearby for another crab to come along who can hopefully fit into the too big shell, thus leaving behind a slightly smaller, just right shell for the first crab. And sometimes when a great new shell shows up on shore, as many as 20 crabs do something pretty amazing. They arrange themselves by size in a crabby conga line. When the perfect crab for the new shell finally comes along, that crab slides into its cozy new home. Then the next crab in line crawls into that crab's old shell, and the next one crawls into that shell, and on down the line. In this shell game, everyone wins.
Bigfoot isn't real. And neither is the Loch Ness Monster. But scientists are still interested in them, or at least they're interested in the way they've been represented throughout history. That's because the changes to the way we think about these mythical animals, known as cryptids, can teach us a lot about how scientific discoveries filter out into the general public. Like, as more and more ancient dinosaurs and other reptiles have been discovered, accounts of Nessie have changed. Long ago, she used to look like a sea serpent. Nowadays, she's unmistakably similar to a plesiosaur. And as we've learned more about related primates and ancient hominids, the Sasquatches that have been sighted are more likely to be hunched-over knuckle walkers than upright citizens, which is super cool. It means that people's expectations shape what they think they see. Even though cryptids are almost certainly not real, they're getting more realistic.
I'm going to explain that we shouldn't be trying to exterminate coyotes because doing that actually makes more of them. Coyote packs tend to be like small families, and in a typical pack of 6 or so, only the dominant female tends to produce pups. The rest of the pack are often the equivalent of the alpha's teenage children. They're often mature, but they still hang around and hunt with their parents. And in this family pack, the younger females don't have their own pups. Instead, the subordinate females go through bizarre, fake pregnancies every breeding season, in which they go through all of the stages of pregnancy, but they don't actually produce pups. They don't even need to have mated to do this. And it's odd. But it does serve a purpose. It likely primes them to act maternally toward their new brothers and sisters, which probably increases group cohesion. But when the dominant female dies, and the pack scatters, her daughters all go out, find mates, and start getting pregnant, for real this time. And then they become the dominant females of their own new packs. And get this, younger females tend to have litters that are double the size of the older alphas. So instead of reducing the number of coyotes, a hunter can actually increase the number of coyotes. Because fighting coyotes is like fighting the mythological Hydra. Every coyote you kill gets replaced by several more.
Monkey Island is, perhaps unsurprisingly, home to thousands of monkeys. And when a major hurricane blew directly across the island, the researchers who studied those monkeys thought that they were going to return to a scene of mass tragedy. But only 2 monkeys died during the storm. It wasn't until long after the skies cleared that the bodies started piling up. In the years following the hurricane, 50 more monkeys died than usual. Stressed out monkeys with weakened immune systems succumbed to diseases. Traumatized females gave birth to babies who died soon after they were born. And with over half of the trees on the island gone, monkeys were suddenly way more exposed, leading to more heat-related illnesses and deaths. All hurricanes have these kinds of lingering deaths, sometimes lots of them. For example, the average hurricane that makes landfall in the US has an aftermath number of more than 200. And other disasters have aftermath deaths too. Major floods lead to heart attacks and overworked farmers who have to replant their soggy fields. Earthquakes often lead to disease outbreaks by breaking sewage pipes and creating unsanitary conditions. Scientists are still trying to figure out what it is about a particular disaster that determines its aftermath number. Disasters like earthquakes tend to have lower aftermath numbers for the same total of deaths because more of the deaths happen during the disaster. But the fact that aftermath deaths exist at all, and that some disasters have so many of them, means we probably need to pay just as much attention, or even more, to the lingering effects of a disaster as to the disaster itself. And when you hear that a hurricane in the US killed, say, 5 people, you should multiply that number in your head by around 200 to understand the true death count of the hurricane.
You might have heard that pollen is plant sperm or some kind of plant sex organ, but that's not actually true. Sperm, by contrast, is a male reproductive cell that contains one set of DNA from its parent. It requires a nice moist environment and, even under perfect conditions, is only viable for a couple of hours to days. So, in order to effectively use sperm to mate, a species has to either get really close during baby making or live in the water, where sperm can persist for a bit before encountering an egg. Now, flowering plants, like trees for example, obviously don't live in water and can't exactly get up close and personal with their mates, so just shooting out sperm simply wouldn't work. This is where pollen comes in. Like sperm, pollen contains one DNA set from its parent, but unlike sperm, pollen itself is actually its own separate living plant made of multiple cells that under the right conditions can live for months depending on the species. Sperm could only dream of that kind of freedom.
A furry ferret named Felicia fixed Fermilab for physicists. Phew! Let's back up. Back in the 1970s, scientists near Chicago were building what was then the world's largest particle accelerator, Fermilab, a 6-kilometer circular tube lined with magnets that allowed researchers to learn more about subatomic particles like quarks. But